In the heart of the Carpathian Mountains, there was a village named Vlastara, isolated from the world by dense forests and jagged cliffs. The villagers whispered about creatures that roamed the woods at night, but no one dared speak openly of them for fear that the shadows might listen. Among the elders, there was one tale that no one could forget: the story of the moonlit bargain. Radu, a man in his mid-30s, had come to Vlastar searching for answers. His wife, Adina, had vanished one night, leaving behind only a trail of dried blood leading into the forest. Desperate and haunted by guilt, he followed the rumors of an ancient vampire who supposedly dwelled in the mountains, believing this creature held the key to her fate. For weeks, Radu trekked through the unforgiving terrain, guided only by his grief. One night, when the moon was full and the winds howled like mourning spirits, he found himself in front of a forgotten monastery, its crumbling stone walls overtaken by creeping vines. An eerie silence hung in the air, and the temperature dropped with every step he took toward the heavy oak doors. He pushed them open, revealing a vast, candlelit chamber. The scent of wax and incense lingered, but there was something else: a sweet, metallic odor that clung to his throat. In the center of the room, sitting upon a decaying stone throne, was a figure cloaked in shadow. The vampire. "Why have you come here, mortal?" The vampire's voice was soft, almost gentle, but there was an undertone of menace that sent a chill down Radu's spine. "I'm looking for my wife. She disappeared in the forest near the village, Adina. They say you might know where she is." The vampire tilted his head, revealing pale skin and eyes that gleamed like polished rubies. He smiled, a cruel and knowing grin. "Adina. Yes, I remember her." Radu's breath caught. "Where is she?" The vampire stood, moving with an unnatural grace, his long fingers tracing the air as if weaving a spell. "She is with me now, in a sense. She came to me willingly, searching for what you could not provide: freedom, power, immortality." "No." Radu's heart raced, his voice cracking. "She would never do that. She would never leave me like this." The vampire approached, his eyes locking with Radu's. "Oh, but you mortals are so blind to the desires of those you love. You think her fragile, afraid of the darkness. But she craved it. She is one of us now." Radu's knees buckled as the weight of the vampire's words sank in. "Then take me to her. Let me see her." The vampire's grin widened. "I could, but there is always a price. For every gift the night offers, there is a cost." Radu stared at the creature, the darkness of the room pressing in around him. "What price?" "You will serve me, forever bound to my will. You will drink from the night, but you will never know the warmth of the sun again. In exchange, I will reunite you with your beloved Adina. The choice is yours." Radu's heart wired with his mind. To be with Adina again, to pull her from the clutches of the monster before him. What wouldn't he sacrifice? "I accept," Radu whispered, the words slipping from his mouth before he could reconsider. The vampire smiled, his fangs gleaming in the candlelight. He reached out, his cold fingers brushing Radu's neck, and then, in one swift motion, sank his teeth into the flesh. Pain exploded through Radu's body, followed by an overwhelming numbness. His vision blurred, and he collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath as darkness consumed him. When he awoke, the world felt different. His senses were sharper, the air tasted of iron, and the silence of the monastery was deafening. The vampire stood before him, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "Now, follow me," the vampire said, turning toward a hidden passage at the back of the room. Radu, unsteady on his feet, obeyed, his mind swimming with the hunger that now gnawed at his insides. They descended into the bowels of the monastery, into a crypt lit only by the faintest glimmer of moonlight filtering through cracks in the ceiling. There, in the center of the chamber, stood a stone coffin, its lid slightly ajar. Radu's heart skipped a beat. "Adina." The vampire gestured toward the coffin, stepping aside as Radu approached. His hands trembled as he reached for the lid, pushing it aside with a low groan of stone. Inside, a figure lay still: Adina. Her skin was pale, her lips tinged blue, but her beauty was undiminished. Radu's breath caught in his throat. She looked asleep, peaceful, but there was something wrong, something lifeless. "She waits for you," the vampire whispered from the shadows, "but you must wake her." Radu looked at the vampire, confused. What do you mean? Blood, the vampire replied simply. You are one of us now. Only your blood will bring her back to life. But once awakened, she will be changed. She will never be the woman you knew. Radu's heart pounded in his chest as he looked down at Adina, her lifeless form so close, yet so far. Could he bring her back, only to lose her again to the darkness? Was he willing to pay that final price? He hesitated, the weight of the decision crushing him. His fingers hovered over her lips, the hunger inside him raging. But something held him back, a flicker of doubt that gnawed at the edges of his mind. The vampire's voice echoed in the chamber. The choice is yours, Radu. But choose quickly, for time is slipping away. Radu clenched his fists, torn between love and fear. What if Adina woke and was no longer the woman he remembered? What if she had embraced the night fully, leaving him lost in her shadow forever? With trembling hands, Radu leaned forward, his lips brushing against her cold skin. And then, he stopped, the hunger fading as a single tear rolled down his cheek. I'm sorry, Adina, he whispered, stepping back. The vampire's eyes narrowed, a slow smile creeping across his face. You have chosen, then. But remember, the night always waits. And so does she. Radu turned and fled from the crypt, the vampire's laughter echoing in his ears. Outside, the night air was sharp and biting, but he felt more alive than ever. Yet, as he walked away from the monastery, he knew the darkness would follow him, and that one day, he would return. Radu didn't stop running until he reached the edge of the forest, where the trees gave way to the open fields surrounding Blastara. His chest heaved, but he felt no fatigue, only the steady, cold thrum of power coursing through his veins. His new existence had begun, and with it came a terrible hunger, gnawing at his insides like a ravenous beast. As he stumbled into the village, he tried to blend into the shadows, his mind still reeling from the choice he had made. The streets were empty, save for the flicker of lanterns in the windows of the villagers' homes. They had always feared the night, but now Radu understood why. He was part of that fear, now an outsider, a predator among them. But there was no time to linger. He had to figure out his next move, though his mind was clouded by hunger and doubt. Asterisk, asterisk, had Adina truly chosen this life? Asterisk, asterisk, the vampire's words gnawed at him. The thought that she had willingly embraced the night, leaving him behind in the world of the living. Asterisk, asterisk, was she beyond saving? Asterisk, asterisk, a soft voice broke the silence, dragging him from his thoughts. Radu. He froze, heart pounding. It was a voice he knew well. Slowly, he turned, his eyes scanning the darkened street. There, standing beneath a flickering lantern, was Adina. But something was wrong. She looked as she had before, beautiful, with the same raven hair and pale skin that had haunted his dreams. Yet, her eyes gleamed unnaturally in the dim light, and her expression was cold, detached, as if she were watching him from a distance. Adina, he whispered, taking a hesitant step forward. How? I told you I was with him, she said softly, her voice carrying a strange, hollow echo. I told you I had found a way to escape this world of pain. Radu's stomach twisted. You? You chose this. She nodded, her gaze piercing through him. I chose freedom. I chose eternity. He shook his head, his voice breaking. No, this isn't you. The Adina I loved would never. The Adina you loved is gone, she interrupted, her voice turning icy. She died the night I went into the forest. What stands before you now is something else, something more. Radu's heart shattered as her words washed over him. He had come all this way, made the ultimate sacrifice, only to find that the woman he had fought so hard to save no longer existed. I don't believe you, he whispered, desperation clawing at his throat. You can come back. We can escape this place, leave the vampire behind, and escape? She repeated with a bitter laugh. You don't understand, Radu. There is no escape. The night is our home now. Her words sent a shiver down his spine. But before he could respond, something flickered in her expression, something that hadn't been there before. A momentary flash of vulnerability, a shadow of the woman he had once known. Radu, she whispered, her voice trembling ever so slightly. I didn't want this, but now, it's too late. He's coming for you. His blood ran cold. Who? The vampire, she replied, her eyes widening with fear. He didn't want you to leave. You broke the bargain. Radu's heart sank. He had defied the vampire, refused to awaken Adina fully from her slumber, and now the consequences were catching up to him. What can we do? He asked, panic rising in his chest. We must run, Adina said quickly, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting the shadows to swallow them both. But there's no time. He knows you're here, and he won't stop until you're either dead or bound to his will. You've angered him, Radu. You're marked, but you. Radu started, stepping closer to her. You're still with him. Why would he come after me? Adina's eyes flickered with something dark and sad. Because he doesn't like loose ends. He never lets anyone leave once they've tasted the night. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled, and a gust of wind swept through the village, extinguishing the lanterns in a single breath. Radu's blood froze as he realized what was happening. The vampire had arrived. A shadow emerged from the darkness, taking the shape of a tall, gaunt figure with glowing red eyes. His presence sucked the warmth from the air, leaving only cold despair in its wake. Radu, the vampire's voice slithered through the night like a serpent's hiss. You cannot outrun me. Adina stepped in front of Radu, her eyes locking with the vampire's. You promised me freedom. The vampire chuckled, the sound low and sinister. And I gave you freedom, Adina. But your husband here, he defied me. He must pay for his insolence. Radu's pulse quickened as the vampire approached, his form growing darker, more menacing. But just as the vampire was about to reach him, Adina raised her hand, her voice trembling with defiance. Take me, she said, her eyes filled with both terror and resolve. Let him go. I'll go back with you. The vampire paused, his eyes narrowing. You would trade your soul for his? Adina nodded, her voice barely a whisper. I would. Radu stared at her, disbelief and horror flooding his mind. No, Adina, don't do this. But before he could protest, the vampire's cold laughter echoed through the village. Very well. Your sacrifice amuses me. In an instant, Adina was gone, swept away into the vampire's shadow, leaving Radu standing alone in the empty street. The silence that followed was suffocating, as though the world itself had held its breath. Radu fell to his knees, his heart torn apart. Adina was gone, trapped forever in the clutches of the vampire. And yet, she had saved him. But why? As he stared into the darkness where she had disappeared, a new thought crept into his mind, chilling him to the bone. What if this wasn't the end? What if she had left him behind for another reason? And what if the bargain wasn't truly finished? Radu sat in the cold silence, his mind a storm of confusion and despair. Adina had sacrificed herself, but why? Why would she choose to return to the vampire's grasp after everything they had been through? He was free, but at what cost? The night closed in around him, the air thick with a suffocating stillness. He remained on his knees, staring at the empty street, lost in the silence of his thoughts. But then, something began to change. A low, almost imperceptible hum vibrated through the ground beneath him, followed by the faintest of whispers on the wind. Radu. He froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The voice was familiar, but distant. Adina's voice, carried on the cold breeze. Radu. Come to me. He looked around, but the village was deserted. The streets were cloaked in shadows, and the only sound was the rustling of dead leaves. Yet, the voice continued, beckoning him. Radu. I'm waiting. Against his better judgment, he rose to his feet, his body moving on its own, as if drawn by some unseen force. His mind screamed at him to turn back, to run, but his legs carried him forward, deeper into the village, toward the woods that surrounded it. The whispers grew louder, more urgent. I need you, Radu. Come. His breath quickened as he entered the forest, the towering trees casting long, twisted shadows in the moonlight. The path ahead was dark, unfamiliar, yet he felt it pulling him, leading him to some unknown destination. And then, in the distance, he saw her. Adina stood in a small clearing, bathed in the pale light of the moon. She looked just as she had before, beautiful, with her dark hair flowing in the wind, her eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. But something about her was wrong. Her skin was too pale, her movements too smooth, like a doll pulled by invisible strings. Adina, he whispered, stepping closer, his voice trembling. Is it really you? She smiled, but there was no warmth in it, only emptiness. Yes, Radu, it's me. He reached out, desperate to touch her, to feel the woman he had once loved. But as his fingers brushed her arm, a cold, sickening sensation washed over him. Her skin wasn't just cold, it was like ice, devoid of life. I've come back for you, she whispered, her eyes locking onto his. I told you I'd wait. Something deep inside him screamed that this was wrong, that this wasn't the Adina he knew. But he couldn't stop himself. He was caught in her gaze, trapped by the same dark power that had taken her. You? You sacrificed yourself for me, Radu stammered, his voice shaking. Why? Why would you go back to him? Her smile widened, and her eyes darkened, the light in them fading to an eerie, hollow glow. I never left him, Radu. You see, I didn't sacrifice myself for you. I sacrificed you for him. His blood ran cold as her words sank in. You broke the bargain, Radu, she continued, her voice turning sharp, menacing. But there's a way to make it right. He wanted you, and now he'll have you. Radu's heart raced as the shadows around them deepened, shifting and twisting into shapes, figures emerging from the darkness. The vampire's presence pressed down on him, suffocating, though he could not see the creature itself. Adina's form began to change before his eyes. Her once beautiful features twisted into something grotesque, her skin tightening over sharp, angular bones. Her eyes, once full of life, became hollow, black pits, and her smile stretched unnaturally wide, revealing rows of jagged, rotting teeth. I'm not Adina anymore, she hissed, her voice distorted and inhuman. I'm what he made me. And now, Radu, it's your turn. The ground beneath him trembled, and a cold, wet hand gripped his ankle from below. He gasped, looking down in horror as more pale, skeletal hands emerged from the earth, dragging him down, pulling him into the soil. The faces of the dead stared up at him, their mouths twisted into silent screams, their eyes wide with eternal suffering. Adina, he cried, struggling against the hands that clawed at him. Please, help me. But the creature that had once been his wife only stood there, watching with cold indifference, as if relishing in his terror. The forest around them warped, the trees bending and swaying as if alive, their branches curling toward him like skeletal fingers. There's no escape, Radu, she whispered, her voice echoing in his mind as the hands tightened their grip. You were always meant to join us. The night claims all. With one final, desperate scream, Radu was pulled beneath the earth, the cold soil filling his mouth, choking him as the last sliver of moonlight vanished from his view. Above, Adina stood in the clearing, her eyes glowing faintly in the darkness as the shadows closed in around her. The vampire's voice echoed softly in the wind, carrying with it a promise. Soon, Radu, you will rise, just as she did, and when you do, the night will be your home. And then there was silence. Only the faint rustle of leaves in the wind remained, and the forest, once again, became still. But deep beneath the earth, Radu's eyes slowly opened. He was not dead. Not yet. And the night was waiting.